Peering from the plaza into the open entrance of the Adventurer Guild, the building appeared to be unoccupied, save for the fact that it was brightly lit. Upon entering, Ludmilla walked by the stairs and turned past the request board to find the two receptionists, Winner and Ishpan, standing at the counter with two different expressions of boredom. Seeing her approach, Ishpan smiled slightly. "I hear you've made a name for yourself," she said lightly. Don't remind me," Ludmilla grimaced. "Did I get the wrong message, or am I early?" Ishpan wrinkled her nose slightly and leaned back as Ludmilla approached. Her gambesine had been hung out in the sun when she had returned to the manor, but the 2 hours it had spent airing out was nowhere near enough to get the odor out from the layers of fabric. "There's still a few minutes left." Ishpan glanced towards the empty area behind her. "Is everyone else going to smell like a burnt field when they come in?" "Probably," Ludmilla replied. "It's only been 2 hours since we got back, so I doubt anyone has been able to air out their equipment properly." "Ugh, you had better stop them before they get near the counter. It's bad enough just being bored." Ludmilla waved casually to the receptionists as she turned back to the open hall. The conversation they had was not one that might have been expected between a guild receptionist and a copper rank adventurer. Before the changes to the Adventurer Guild, copper ranks were, to put it bluntly, a pool of cheap labor with little to no expectations attached to them. The guild generally did not invest any resources into copper plates, preferring to instead wait for the few that survived to crawl out of the pile and advance to higher ranks. The changes still treated the lower ranks as a filter. However, it could be fairly said that the bar had actually been raised, since the bare minimum to qualify for the new work of the guild was now gold rank. The Sorcerer's Kingdom had no use for adventurers as transient security contractors, so those who failed to achieve the new standard were simply mustered out. The reason for their amiable relationship, Ludmilla considered Ishpan the closest thing to a friend in the guild, stemmed from their first encounter. Ludmilla appreciated her expertise and attention to detail when it came to matters revolving around the Adventurer Guild, and she now relied heavily on the receptionist for her knowledge and interpretations on various things. Ishpan was more than happy to accommodate her, so it appeared that they got along very well. As she went back past the stairs leading to the second floor, she saw several adventurers enter through the doorway. "Oh, looks like the sixth was Lady Bagworm," a tall, blonde man at the front of the group called out as he entered at the head of the group. His broad shoulders blocked Ludmilla's view of the others who filed in behind him. "Henrich," a woman's voice hissed from the door. Another man and 3 women followed, each sporting a copper tag fastened around their necks. As the newly mandated Adventurer Guild had not yet organized themselves to the point where basic equipment was standardized, each of the adventurers still wore a mix of equipment that fell along the lines of what a copper plate traditionally wore, which was simply what they were able to afford. Roughly speaking, it was the same sort of equipment that Ludmilla wore, save for one who looked to be a mage. Looks like you're all here," an elf woman with ruddy red hair looked down from the top of the stairs nearby. The adventurers below straightened at the sight of the orichalcum plate which glinted in the light as she casually descended. Yup, she nodded to herself. "Let's go." Hold up," someone said as the elf turned to leave. "What are we even doing? We just got here with no explanation or anything." "What do you mean?" the elf answered with a sidelong look. "The guild only does one thing now." That was true, in the broadest sense. The guild was now an organization revolving around the fielding of its expeditions. Everything they did was for the eventual goal of exploration and discovery. Seeing that her response appeared to be unsatisfactory, the elf turned back around and placed a hand on her hip. "I guess if you want details," she said, "we're going to the training area. We need to start toughening you newbies up. Those ogres were swatting you left and right earlier today, and they were barely trying." "Oh, ogres?" The mage, a young woman in plain, brown robes, said worriedly. "What happened?" Yeah," the elf said after looking over the woman for a moment. "I guess you weren't there. Can't have casters going into things half empty, after all. Long and short of it is that the contingent doing exercises this afternoon was sent packing by a handful of ogres and goblins. We couldn't even get to where we wanted to go in the first place." "Oh no, that's terrible," the mage replied with a distraught look. "Was anyone hurt? Did anyone die?" "Hell yeah." The elf's emerald eyes sparkled as she grinned. There were casualties all over the field. One of the ogres died. He got back up after we were done, though. Can't wait to do it again. A look of disturbed confusion painted the mage's face. The rest of the copper rank adventurers, who had been present that afternoon, carried grim expressions as they recalled their one-sidedly poor performance, which did not help at all. We're, not doing something like that with just us now, are we? Henrich asked. Nah, it'll be more tame stuff, the elf answered. You'll be going through the upper floors of the training area. Dungeon crawling, I think they called it. This group is the first one through, so we'll be seeing how things square up at the same time. The Orichalcum adventurer continued to speak as she walked past them towards the door. Anyways, it'll take you an hour to get out there, so you had better get a move on. Same place as earlier today, by the way. Make sure everyone in your party knows what they're supposed to be doing before you arrive. The elf left without waiting for a response, and the group had little choice but to leave the city and head towards their destination. Past the gate, beyond the noise and activity of the city, someone finally spoke over the rustle of the wind through the grass. I still don't understand. It was the mage. What happened this afternoon? Pretty much what Mary, that Orichalcum ranger, said, replied Henrich. We got our asses handed to us before we even got started. 30 adventurers against something like 1/3 our number in ogres and goblins, and we lost all but one party's worth. And the casualties? She made it sound like a disaster. It was, said another adventurer. But it was just that, an exercise. The Sorceress Kingdom is really pulling out all the stops with this new guild. When I first heard about it I thought maybe they'd give us pointers, or maybe have classes or something, but it's pretty much live combat. Everything is real, even death is real, if you bite it, and after we're done they just send someone out to pick us back up again. Pretty much, agreed someone else. We should sort ourselves out before we reach that tomb again. I don't feel like getting sent back like a whipped dog for a second time. They followed the trail that had been left in the grass that afternoon for several minutes before someone broke the silence. I'm Henrich, a fighter. Kyla, fighter. Themis, cleric. How, rogue. Pen, sorcerer. Ludmilla, ranger. Wait, Lady Bagwam is a ranger? Laughed Henrich. I thought wilderness survival is a ranger's shtick. How did you get poisoned by a plant? I thought it looked dangerous, so I went to take a closer look, Ludmilla replied. They don't usually jump out and bite you like that. Enough of that already, How said. How do we even arrange this? What was it? The usual 4, plus a scout and something. Sounds about right. Henrich's voice turned a bit more serious. But we have a ranger and a rogue. Who is the scout? It should be How, Pen reasoned. They said each team has a diplomat or negotiator, so that would be the noble, right? Rangers can run center guard as well, which frees me up for magical support. Several moments passed over the party in silence, perhaps as they waited for someone to point out any flaws, or just take initiative with further planning. Given the fiasco she started earlier in the day, Ludmilla felt that it would be out of place for her to speak. I gotta say though, Henrich remarked, these teams of 6 really do feel sturdier. In some ways, maybe, Themis said, but there are more people to look out for now, and fewer spells to go around. I heard that the decision was handed down from the Sorceress Kingdom, said Kyla. The size of the expeditions was decided by them as well. Maybe it's just the way they do things, wherever they came from. You warrior types have it easy the way it is, Pen complained. The way it was explained to me, team members are interchangeable to keep expeditions flowing smoothly. Especially with training, us casters use up our mana and we're just swapped out for other casters and told to go rest and study. Warriors can just get healed up in the city and jump right back into training if they're needed to fill a spot. Maybe they have ways to restore mana as well? Henrich mused. Yeah, right. Themis rolled her steel grey eyes. Even if they could, why would a powerful caster give their mana to a weak one? They have better things to do with their mana. I doubt they'll be flinging non-casters into training non-stop anyways. When we're out doing real work, we'll need to manage our own resources, including mana. They'll want us learning that as a part of this training as well, yes? At least healers will see a lot of love, Pen said. It was hard enough to find one before all this, but now it's ridiculous. A lot of the old members have left, and the Temple of the Four won't even give the Sorceress Kingdom the time of day. Say, how is it the Six still have their people running around?" Themis appeared to collect herself upon hearing the question, and the words that followed had half the air of a proselytizer. The other half sounded like she had memorized a script. "Followers of the Six need not fear what comes after," the young cleric told them. "Sursana will grant a peaceful rest to the souls of his faithful. It's everyone else that seems to be running around worrying about being turned into a field worker for the rest of eternity." "A golden opportunity for the old faith," Kyla snorted. "That's..." Themis started angrily, but she reined in her voice. "Of course, we will always welcome those who wish to return to the fold, but that is besides the point. We will always be here for our fellow humans, whether they be regular citizens, adventurers or otherwise." "We're getting way off track again," Hao's annoyed voice came from the front. "I can already see the ruins from here. Do we have some sort of plan?" "Should be self-explanatory, shouldn't it?" Henrich said. "Since they said it was a tomb, maybe it's something like an old catacomb. We got 2 fighters for the front line and we can just make our way through carefully. Since it's training, they should be including something for everyone to do, so Hao should be scouting ahead, checking for hazards as we clear the way. That sound about right?" The tall warrior had a frivolous manner, but, between the copper-ranked adventurers, there seemed to be little else to add to his summary. They reached the ruins to the northwest of the city as the sun began to sink behind the forested hills which marked the border to Baron Ardoin's domain to the west. The field had been left mostly as it had been following the afternoon skirmish. Portions of it lay trampled from the fighting, while the areas to the west and north were scorched to the ground by the fires that the adventurer contingent had set. The grove and the ruins that stood within awaited silently, casting shadows across the waving tufts of grass that remained. There was no sign that anything awaited them, no enemies, nor any of their seniors from the guild to provide guidance. The group came in single file, snaking well around any suspicious-looking stones that might have surprisingly hostile vines, and soon they stood in a semicircle in front of the unassuming limestone structure that contained the entrance to the tomb. As the area around the city had long been frequented by humans, there was little chance that the building was a genuine ruin. Whoever had built it took great pains to make it look old and weathered, however, so it certainly gave off the atmosphere of one. There was no light inside, and the stairs spiraled down so they could not even see what lay further beyond. Oh, you're here." A voice from an unknown source greeted them as they stood around wondering what to do. Ludmilla immediately recognized the soft voice of Lord Mayor. "Welcome," he said. Don't die please. That would be bad." Silence hung over the adventurer party as they awaited something more from the disembodied voice of Lord Mayor, but it appeared nothing further was forthcoming. "I'm beginning to think that they just don't like explaining things around here," Henrich said. "Maybe because it's supposed to be that simple?" Penn ventured a guess. "We're just copper ranks, after all. Mary said we're supposed to go through the first few floors of this dungeon and that's it." Their heads all turned towards Hao. "Right," the rogue said. "Scouting, or something." He pulled down the cowl of his mantle, revealing a head of close-cropped sandy hair. After checking over the assorted items attached to his belt, he padded into the ruin. Given the exciting welcome that the adventurers had received that afternoon, Ludmilla was half expecting something to jump out at their rogue as soon he entered. Hao silently disappeared down the staircase with no such thing happening, however, and the party let out a collective breath. "So are we going along with Henrich's plan?" Themis asked, just to be sure. "If things are as narrow as this," Kyla motioned to the entrance, "I can't think of any better way." A flickering light appeared from the ruin entrance, followed by Hao, who was holding a torch in his left hand. A long dagger, similar in length and appearance to Ludmilla's own, was in his right. "It's clear to the bottom of the stairs," he reported, wiping his blade on the grass. "What happened?" Kyla asked, looking down at the long, greenish-yellow smear. "There was some sort of bug waiting at the bottom of the stairs," he replied. "I didn't want to see what it would do, so I gave it a good stab while I had the chance." Hao jerked his head to motion the rest of the party forward before turning around to head back down. When they arrived behind him in the small room below, they came across what Hao had described. Cast aside to one of the corners of the chamber was a reddish-brown insect with a flat, oval body about as large as Ludmilla's foot. The same, greenish-yellow ichor leaked out of the single puncture through its abdomen. Half of the party recoiled in disgust. "Pretty gross, huh?" House said with a hint of amusement in his voice. Kyla's azure eyes just grew wider the longer she stared at the dead insect. "What the hell, that thing is huge," she sounded like she was going to be sick. "How, that's the only one, right? You're not going to say something like 6 more of them ran away when I lit my torch, right?" "Relax," How replied, handing his torch to Themis. "There was only one. Gonna check ahead again, I'll be back." The rogue entered the next hall and disappeared around the corner. Kyla was peeking over her shield at the ground nervously. She was definitely in no state of mind to be relaxed. Themis looked around the entrance chamber, holding the torch up near to the closest wall. "I wonder how long this took to construct." The cleric voiced her thoughts aloud as she examined a broken fixture, and all this only to damage parts of it to give it an authentic feeling. "I don't recognize any of this imagery though." The walls of the room were fashioned out of uniform grey stone blocks. Its detailing and fixtures were not of any style Ludmilla was familiar with. The majority were defaced and left in various stages of disrepair, leaving jagged protrusions of stone that cast uneven shadows in the torchlight. She agreed with the cleric's observation. The time and cost of doing something like this all for the sake of creating an authentic training environment spoke volumes of the Sorceress Kingdom's investment into the guild. How appeared in the corridor once again. He returned to them with relaxed steps, and his grey eyes glanced around the room before he gave his report. "Hall goes 30 meters to the right," he said in a low voice. "There's some sort of tile about halfway through that I think might be a trap. I left a piece of slag glass on it that should catch the light of the torches. The room at the end has another one of those bugs. It's just sitting there like the other one was in this room when I found it." "You're killing it," Kyla said as she looked at Henrich's brandished warhammer. "I don't want to get anywhere near one of those." As mentioned, the piece of glass Howe had placed to mark the potential trap glimmered clearly with reflected torchlight as soon as they rounded the corner. Beyond, they could see what appeared to be the exact same insect sitting in the middle of the next room. They stopped after passing the marked tile and looked towards the occupant of the next room warily. Its long feelers waved around slightly, but it did not react to their presence. There's nothing else in there, right?" Henrich said to make sure. "Beats me," Howe returned. "Not like I can walk in front of the thing to look around. Did you want me to kill it for you?" No. "I got this," the fighter said, hefting his warhammer. "Does anyone know what these actually are? Abilities? Poison? Rangers should be familiar with this sort of stuff, shouldn't they?" "It just looks like a cockroach," Ludmilla said. "A large cockroach. They're not poisonous, as far as I know. It might run off or fly somewhere if you miss somehow." Her explanation was as casual as she could make it, but her words seemed to only generate more unease. Kyla raised her shield again and kicked Henrich on the side of his boot. The other fighter shook his head as he stepped forward to face off against his opponent. When he got within a few meters of the cockroach, it raised its head and feelers towards him. "Why are you waiting?" Kyla pushed him from behind. "Kill it, kill it, kill it, kill it." Henrich chuckled incredulously as he was edged forward and smashed it with an overhead swing. A second insect detached itself from where it was hiding inside the room and flew at him. He threw his arm out, slapping it out of the air with his shield. It bounced off of the wall and careened down the hall to where the rest of the party watched. The cockroach skidded to a halt on its back near Kyla's feet, stunned and twitching erratically from Henrich's reaction. The other fighter let out a shrill shout and kicked it back towards the room. Henrich was jounced slightly as it bounced off of his leg and he turned to swing his weapon down to finish it off. Howe mumbled something while shaking his head, walking off to investigate further. "Easy," Henrich smiled lightly as the party entered the room. "What? Why?" "We're switching sides," Kyla said as she pointed her steel longsword at him. "Keep that weapon away from me." Henrich looked to the head of his warhammer, which was dripping ichor. He laughed as he kicked the insect corpses out of the way. "Just how are you going to survive like this?" he asked her as he stepped over to stand on her right. "There's far worse than bugs." "Those aren't just bugs," she scowled at him. "You've just never." Kyla's words trailed off as she glanced at the dead cockroach and quickly looked away again, shuddering. The second room was nearly identical to the first. An identical corridor extended out from it, turning in the same direction. Ludmilla wrinkled her nose as the pungent odor of the smashed cockroaches filled the air. Thankfully, How appeared again within a few minutes. 2 traps, I marked them the same way. Another room, with another roach. Let's just move, Pen said quickly. This smell is horrible. The party skirted around the traps, which put them not far away from the next room. As with the previous insect, this one did not react to their presence in the hall. So if the last hall was 2, Henrich mused, does that mean that this next one will be 3? You're up again, Kyla nudged him. Keep putting that bug masher to work. Don't send one at us this time. What? Henrich replied, Nah. That last one that flew at me looked like it was trying to bite. 3 at a time will definitely get me. I haven't been bitten by a bug that big before, but I'm not keen on feeling what it's like if I can help it. Then let's just kill it from here. Kyla's voice became even more shrill. Ludmilla, just shoot it, you can hit it from this far away, right? The room was only 10 meters away, and the target wasn't moving. An archer that couldn't land that shot couldn't rightly be called an archer at all. She pulled an arrow from the quiver at her waist, knocking it and releasing it at half-draw. The arrow buried itself in its mark and the cockroach was carried away by the arrow as it bounced off of the floor and out of sight. A rustling sound was immediately heard and the expected additions skittered into view, coming towards the party at a startling speed. Kyla froze, holding up her shield out towards the darting insect headed her way. It jumped up and fastened itself onto its wooden surface, and Hao reached out to stab it with his dagger, pushing it off as it thrashed and died. Henrich met the charge of his opponent, bringing his weapon down and striking a clean blow. Maybe a bit too clean. The remainder of its corpse continued in the direction of its momentum, tumbling past the members behind who quickly stepped out of the way. It came to rest on the nearest marked tile and there was an audible click. What does it do, How? Pen asked worriedly as a grinding sound started around them. Hell if I know, he snapped. It's built into the structure, it's not some hastily rigged thing. If it was, I would have disarmed it instead of marking it. The party relocated into the now cleared room. Flipping their formation around, they eyed the vacated hall from where the grinding sound continued. After a minute, the sound stopped and panels on either side of the corridor fell to the floor with a clatter, spilling a great amount of cockroaches into the hall. Ludmilla sighed and knocked a fresh arrow. As she did so, she mused over how pointless the action seemed against so many small targets. What happened? It's too dark to see what's there. Pen peered into the hall over the shoulders of the front line. A lot of things happened, Ludmilla replied. Do we have any way to clear the hall all at once? Everyone turned to stare at her with a horrified expression. Themis leaned forward into the corridor with her torch and the shining mass reacted, scurrying away from the light. Kyla did not look well at all. I don't have any spells that can affect large areas yet, Pen offered, but I do have a vial of alchemist's fire if it's needed. Wouldn't that be a waste? Henrich's voice sounded pained at the notion. This is just training, so using items is a bit. They aren't attacking right away anyways, Hao said. Maybe they don't do anything until we do, like the others. Where do they even get so many of those things, anyways? Henrich looked for a way through. Is some place in the Sorceress Kingdom drowning in cockroaches? See, can't we just keep going? Kyla whimpered. We're supposed to be headed further in, anyways. Maybe there's another way out. A long flight of stone steps led down out of the room. Like the tomb's entrance, it curved away and out of sight. Hao started to make his way below, but stopped when he looked over his shoulder and found Kyla following immediately behind him. A little space? It's dangerous if I don't check things out first. Don't make us wait in that room with those things. Kyla complained. 10 seconds. 10 seconds should be enough of a lead, right? Fine, but if you see me stop up ahead, you have to stop at that distance as well. Don't just walk all over me when I'm checking things out. At the bottom of the stairs, there was another room with another cockroach waiting for them. This one was far larger, however, over a meter in length. Bloody. Henrich brought his hammer to bear again. Now here's the question, Hao mused, is it just this one in the room since this is the first room of this floor, or are there 3 others in this room because it's the 4th room so far? The fighter stopped his advance to look around nervously. There's no way 3 things that big can hide in a room this small, he said. I swear you've never had to deal with these before. Kyla stared at the giant cockroach nervously. They can hide anywhere. We still have to move forward, Henrich returned, unless you want to go back up and through the others. With no further voices of dissent, he walked forward again. The cockroach looked up at him with its compound eyes, mandibles working silently. You know, Henrich said as he glowered down at the cockroach, do we even need to attack these? It's not like we're going to be chasing every little thing we see out in woe. The cockroach jumped up at Henrich, bowling the fighter over. Its legs clung to the fighter's legs as shining mandibles gnawed on the edge of the round shield he had brought up in reaction. Hao, who stood the closest behind him, reached out and jabbed the insect in the abdomen. The injured insect released its hold and started to scurry off. Someone shoot that thing before it gets away. If attacking one drew others nearby, Ludmilla dared not imagine what happened if this one ran away into the depths of the tomb. Magic arrow. Pen cast a spell as Ludmilla released an arrow. A flaring dart of magical energy shot out alongside her own attack. Both struck the fleeing insect one after the other. Its smooth, giant form collapsed onto the floor with a scraping sound. Was that a good idea? Themis asked after the group let out a collective sigh of relief. Mana is limited, and Ludmilla shot it too. Better safe than sorry, said Kyla. Imagine if it ran through 3 more rooms? We'd get buried in these things. Is what we're doing really all there is to it, though? Ludmilla looked around at the damaged features of the chamber. Maybe they're going easy on us to start with, but all we're really doing is walking around killing things. I thought they would have more in mind for us. This seems less like exploring and more like cleaning. Yeah, it does seem more like something that adventurers usually do, Henrich said after thinking it over, but what you said about going easy on us is probably the right idea, since none of us know each other. Why else would they space things out so we can talk after every fight? Once again, the fighter's insight lay at odds with his frivolous personality. Either he was possessed of a great deal of situational awareness and knew how to act accordingly, or his usual attitude was simply a facade. Being able to make quick assessments and making sound calls based on them was something that accompanied a fighter's usual role in an adventurer party, so it seemed he was well suited to his career choice. If that's the case, said Hao, we need to get our act together. They might give us a bad assessment if they think we're fooling around too much. The rogue stepped away and disappeared into the next hall. Henrich turned to face the other party members. He has a point. His gaze ran over the faces of the women looking back towards him. We need to pick things up. Half of our front line almost collapses every time we start a fight and our attacks are being wasted without coordination. I'll just hold off on casting spells until they're called for. Pen looked down. It'll save on mana, and Ludmilla is supposed to be running center guard anyways. I joined the guild before everything happened, Kyla said. I didn't think I'd be doing this when I signed up. You and me both, replied Henrich as he waved the head of his warhammer pointedly. I joined for the same reason most people did here, to earn bounties off of undead out in Katsa. Now we're best friends with them. Since you were with the guild before, you should know that what they're offering now is way better than the life we signed up for before, right? I get that, she replied sullenly. It's too good to give up. Just give me some time. Pluton Einsack crossed his arms as he observed the proceedings from his cushioned chair. The furniture in the room was of a luxurious quality that, in turn, made him uncomfortable. He shifted in his seat for the 3rd time as he watched the hastily assembled copper rank party progress through the training area. Einsack and the 6 party leaders of the afternoon's exercise were in various reclining postures as they, too, watched the novices make their way through 2 mirrors of remote viewing provided by the Sorcerer's Kingdom. Occasionally, one of them would glance around the room at their surroundings. He couldn't blame them. All of the preparations that the Sorcerer's Kingdom made for the Adventurer Guild seemed to surpass expectations in every way, whether it be their financial support, powerful magic or the facilities provided. The large room was situated on the top floor of one of the abandoned administrative buildings in Irantal's central district, once the archives that had been emptied with the flight of Lord Panasoli Repton-Ma'ir and his staff following the defeat of the Royal Army at Katza Plains. There were 8 rooms on the floor, each set up with 2 mirrors each and various comforts provided out for the guild members as they monitored the progress of adventurer parties' progression through different parts of the training area outside the city. Each seat was placed behind a desk, amply stocked with ink and stationery to take notes with. There was a table where refreshments had been provided, and extra seats arrayed around the viewing area for additional observers. Mayor, the manager of the Adventurer Guild training area, stood to the side of the 2 mirrors, watching the proceedings intently. The boy barely blinked, his clear, wide eyes reflected the light of the images in front of him. He barely said anything aside from his initial greetings to the adventurers. Once in a while, he would adjust the mirrors to offer a better view of the activity within. Currently, one was fixed on the main group of the party, while the other was set to follow the party's rogue as he regularly scouted ahead. "That guy is a real workhorse," commented Utrecht. "He's doing 3 times as much as everyone else." "Well, that's just how it is," Mary said. "Scouting's a lonely job, not like you can have 3 or 4 of us tripping over each other doing it. It's really the worst when you're a newbie though, you're weak and vulnerable with no items or tricks to help you. Just gotta keep slogging along until you do, and hope you don't get eaten by something before that." "I never knew how much work it was until now," Utrecht murmured as they continued watching. Eintzak silently agreed with the man. Before he had retired, his own party's ranger worked tirelessly to keep their group informed and secure against both their enemies and the elements at large. Watching the rogue in the mirror really showed how underappreciated those efforts could be, even amongst veteran adventurers. "Doesn't that mean we're going to need more reconnaissance types?" Jocelyn asked. "This is just a narrow catacomb, what about when they're out exploring the wilderness?" "It becomes a problem if we do it that way too," Eintzak replied. "Each scout needs to have a party supporting them just in case a quick response is needed. We can't send our people out alone for days at a time just to make things convenient for the rest. It would alienate them from the others even more and it might lend to the idea that they are numerous and expendable." "The way the expedition camps are set up helps too," Ilan piped in. "It's a safe place to rest after long treks and to swap party members according to our needs out there. I think Guildmaster Akshir said something about being able to station divination specialists as well as any other types of mages we'll need for the things that are too dangerous to carelessly approach in person." "That's still being discussed," Eintzak said. "It's not necessarily a bad idea, but for the time being the city doesn't have the casters to spare. The Guildmaster of the Mage Guild should know this, of all people. Also, until we know that our procedures are safe enough for it, I'd advise against using the expedition camps as a base to house non-adventurer consultants. Samples and collected information can be studied in the city safely, so unless the work requires an on-site presence, it is an unnecessary risk." The idea that magic capable of moving limited amounts of people and cargo around was readily available was yet another idea that many found difficult to wrap their heads around. Before the Sorceress Kingdom, flight magic was the best they could come up with in Nirantal, with teleportation being a 5th-tier spell out of the reach of the local arcane casters. Now, it was just a matter of making a request. Ilan, as well as most of the remaining mages of the Magician Guild, were the exact opposite when it came to the magical might of the Sorceress Kingdom. They had flung their arms wide open to embrace the opportunities that the nation presented, new power and knowledge to further advance their passion in the art. Many hoped that they, too, would be able to wield such magic. Even if they didn't, the Sorceress Kingdom's offerings represented countless lifetimes of research and study that they could happily pursue with the support of the nation. "Looks like they're moving again." Blair turned their attention away from the discussion and back to the adventurer team in the tomb. "According to the itinerary, things should be picking up soon?" All eyes were glued to the mirrors as the adventurers cautiously advanced. The copper floors of the tomb were simple in nature and divided into 3 levels. The first was sections designed to ensure that all the party was capable of performing all of the necessary tasks to function. The second consisted of a series of encounters that would require a team to work together to overcome, and the third was used as a test to identify which members of the party qualified for Iron rank. As straightforward as it was, however, several major issues had already been made plain before them. "Are they holding out again?" Mary said from the side. "This time it'll definitely bite them in their asses if they don't do something about it." The first issue was due to the perception that it was training. The adventurers were overly sparing in their use of party resources. Alchemical potions and magic were being used in an unrealistically frugal manner. It was a sentiment that any adventurer from the old organization could understand. Generally all the costs and risks of adventuring fell on the adventurers themselves, so with nothing to justify use of those resources to offset these costs, one would naturally be hesitant to use them. The cleric used a healing spell, Blair said, shaking his head. Bad move. She should have used a slower acting salve or potion since they're not under immediate threat. Reminds me of some kid that used to do that all the time, Mary snickered. Hey now, that was over 20 years ago. Blair turned defensive. Besides, being there once myself makes this all the more painful to watch. 20 years, and the newbies are still making the same mistakes that we made so long ago. Have we really been so stagnant after all this time? It's because they're copper, isn't it? Utrecht interrupted himself as the party worked to finish their fight, the two fighters facing off against the two giant cockroaches awaiting them. According to Mayer, their controller had instructed them to not be too aggressive, so the front line held easily. The adventurers went from one to the other, decisively killing them before they could flee like the one they had encountered in the previous room. See? They learn quickly, Utrecht continued after the rogue headed out again. It's not all gloom and doom here. Anyways, copper plates don't know because the guild never paid much attention to them. 9 out of 10 new adventurers either quit or died before they earned iron. It just wasn't worth it to babysit every new face that showed up. That's true, but how many we could have saved with just a little bit of attention is a question I still ask myself after all these years. Einsack's words created a somber atmosphere amongst the veterans. It was a question that all had considered at least once in their long careers. He wondered if that hardened attitude towards the lowest ranks of adventurers was something that would continue in the new organization. Even though they faced little risk of dying during training at copper and iron ranks, those that couldn't make gold would be dismissed. There was little reason to get close to or invest time and effort into those that could potentially fail to make the cut, and few were so friendly that they would go out of their way to try. We'll find out soon enough, he said, attempting to lift the mood, but the group had already turned their attention back to the trainees. With 3 opponents, the party had opted to hold off 2 while overwhelming the third quickly. What followed after was an uneventful repeat of the previous battle. The group was overly defensive in their tactics, but Einsack supposed that it came hand in hand with being new adventurers. There was also the matter of the training regimen itself, and how Mayer designed each encounter and scenario. It had been the source of some confusion when their collaboration with the training area manager had started. The Dark Elf had used many terms unfamiliar to any of the adventurers that Einsack had called in to help lay out their future plans. Mayer was aware of how the guild rated opponents and quests, but the finer measure that their difficulty ratings provided seemed superfluous to both him and his sister. Einsack supposed that, to the unfathomably powerful servants of His Majesty, wondering if something weighed 1 mote of dust or 2 mattered little. He remained adamant on the use of difficulty ratings, however, and was able to convince them of the merits of its continued use as a more suitable measure for ensuring the training facility was as comprehensive as possible. When reviewing the content of the current session before it started, he had estimated the opponents in the dungeon to have a difficulty rating of anywhere from 1 to 12. While copper-ranked adventurers also occupied this range, there were notable advantages when one considered how many there were in the party as well as the clear edge provided by their equipment. The adversaries adventurers commonly saw fulfilling copper-rank quests were mundane in nature, animals, weak, tribal demi-humans and the like. Such opponents without special natural weapons, abilities, spells, or access to advanced equipment had issues overcoming the protection provided by even the wooden shields and light armor that beginner adventurers used. In addition, these opponents were poorly protected, so even simple, unenchanted weapons were more than sufficient to defeat them. In this situation, the training party was being overly cautious and wasting time, though he supposed there was no way for them to know this. With experience would come confidence, and the ability to assess how dangerous a situation actually was. Having such nicely standardized opponents to train against was something that could only be accomplished in the controlled environment of the training area. Out on a real job, a copper party could take a commission to eliminate weak targets, but, if those targets had a stronger individual among them, say, a tribal leader or shaman type ruling a group of demi-humans, it would often result in fatalities, or even spell the end of the entire adventurer team. The gap between a copper or iron ranked adventurer and an adversary equivalent to silver or gold was a painful one that was encountered far too often on the field. He saw Mary stretch and yawn in the corner of his vision. Her drawn-out actions started a chain reaction amongst the assembled proctors. Einsack knew putting copper ranks through generally non-lethal training would take time, but this group had taken over an hour to clear through 6 rooms. At this rate, he was actually afraid that the observers would lapse in their observations due to how slow it was. Fortunately, there should be enough to rotate them at some point so a single set of veterans was not exposed to hours upon hours of sluggish copper rank training. "Look alive," he said while fighting off a yawn of his own. "Third floor's where it should all come together, or fall apart." Einsack leaned forward in his seat as the party entered the first chamber. Unlike the previous rooms, this one was empty, the starting point for an uphill struggle to the end. "There goes the scout," Mary said. "Say, isn't it a bit unfair that we get them into this pattern then suddenly change everything? First 2 floors are just to make sure all the parts are working, yeah?" Mocknage stated. "A freebie. Third floor's the only one with anything resembling a challenge for a copper party." After Howe crossed the halfway point in the hall to the next chamber, the fight began. Smaller cockroaches began to appear out of cleverly hidden cracks in the walls of the first chamber, and it was only until the first one flew at the panicking female fighter's face that they realized that they were no longer the only ones in the room. Though the mirrors did not transmit sound, they could see the frenzy of shouting and stomping as they fought to keep the trickle of insects away. It was an image that fell far short of what one might have thought of when they heard the word adventure and the stone floors were becoming slick with mashed cockroaches. Thankfully, while the mirrors could not transmit sounds, neither could they transmit smells. Their scout was in his own predicament. Howe had turned to look back at the commotion behind him and found himself cut off by more insects that had crawled out of the openings that lined the hall. "Are they just going to stand there smashing roaches forever?" Ellen mused. "More to the point," Mocknage said, "how are there so many of them?" It took a few moments for Mare, who was still intently watching his handiwork, to realize that the question was intended for him. Oh. Kyuhyuku's family was able to have some extra food recently. They were getting so big that they were about to spill overcrowd their living space. He was more than happy to send some over to help out. Even Demiurge praised me for the idea. An inspired reallocation of idle resources, he called it. The dark elf boy almost smiled, then stopped as if he was unsure about whether he should actually show pride at his achievement. "Does that mean that we'll be watching newbie teams fighting roaches every day?" Mary asked. "My sister said it's not a good idea to do the same thing every day, so I thought maybe a rotation for now. The first floors will be expanded eventually to have many things, but for now we wanted training floors for everyone, right?" "Right." Einsack wasn't sure how to respond. He hoped that the days would be chosen at random, or many adventurers would mysteriously happen to be absent on Cockroach Day. It was probably just better to have a variety of different training opponents in any given session where they made sense. It seemed that the adventurers had finally decided to advance while defending themselves from the encroaching roaches. Einsack could not tell whether they had actually coordinated a move with their trapped scout, or they had found the situation untenable and spontaneously decided to get away. As they pressed forward while fighting, more and more of the areas they left in their wake were being filled with the insects that would then join the dark stream from the first room that was following them. One more hall and one more room to go, Einsack thought to himself as they entered the second chamber. Somehow, they still had the presence of mind to send their oak to scout ahead once more while they fought off the wave of insects behind them. Howe seemed to be periodically calling back to them as he stepped forward, probably to try to gauge how far he could advance before triggering additional sources of the mounting infestation. He made it all the way within sight of the last room with his expectations unfulfilled, however, and, with any semblance of stealth negated by his continued callbacks to the team, he shouted one last time for them to catch up to him.